Hi, the name of this Blender video tutorial is Multiple Blender Scenes. So far we've been working within a single Blender scene. However, Blender allows modelers to work within multiple scenes within a single .blend file. To demonstrate multiple Blender scenes, I've modeled a simple snow scene. Now notice at the top of the display in the information window, the default scene is named Scene. If you're using multiple Blender scenes, it's a very good idea to name them so that you can easily understand each scene's function or purpose. I'll rename this scene Snow Scene. If I click on the plus button, there are 5 scene options: New, Copy Settings, Link Objects, Link Object Data, and Full Copy. From this list, I will select New. I'll name this scene Snow Test. The new scene is completely blank. It contains no objects, no lights, no camera. It's a completely blank slate. I'll add a cone object to this new scene. In the outliner panel, Snow Test Scene is listed along with the cone object. I can go back and forth between the snow scene and the snow test scene by clicking on the scene names in the outliner panel. Setting up a new blank scene is sometimes useful for testing out ideas. You can model and test things in the scene without affecting the main working scene. However, objects modeled in the new scene cannot be moved or copied to any other scene. I'll go back to the snow scene. I'll click the Scene plus sign again and select Full Copy. I'll name this scene Snow Scene Copy, June 22nd, 2012. As the name implies, the Full Copy scene copies all of the elements from the original scene to the copy. It is listed in the outliner panel along with all of the copied scene elements. Note that all of the copied objects have been renamed using the .001 suffix. I will add a UV sphere object to the full copy scene. Note that the sphere object does not appear in the original snow scene, nor does it appear in the new snow scene test scene. However, if I select the sphere object in the full copy scene and go to the materials editor, I do have access to all the materials that were created in the original scene. A full copy scene is a snapshot in time of the original scene. This is why it's a good idea to add to the scene name some indication of when the full scene copy was made. I'm going to close the expanded outline for my 3 scenes in the outliner panel, so it's easier to go from one scene to another. I'll then go back to the original snow scene. Here I will press the Scene Plus button again and select Copy Settings. I will name this scene Snow Scene Settings Copy. Like the new copy, the Copy Settings scenes is a completely blank scene. The only difference between choosing New and Copy Settings is that the Copy Settings will copy over all of the rendering settings from the original scene. Choosing New provides only the Blender default rendering settings. Notice that in addition to clicking on the scene listing in the outliner panel, I can also click on the Browse Scenes button to the left of the scene name and select any of the scenes in my Blender file. I'll select the Snow Scene Settings Copy scene that I just created. Then I'll click on the X button to the right of the scene name. This deletes, rather abruptly, the scene. I'll go back to the original snow scene and click on the plus button again. This time I'll select Linked Object Data. I'll name this scene Snow Scene Linked Data. Like the full copy, the linked data makes a complete copy of the original scene. Note in the outliner panel that each copied object has been renamed with a .002 suffix, This is because there is already a .001 suffix used on the full copy scene I made earlier. The difference between a linked data copied scene and the full copied scene is that in the linked data scene, the copied objects still refer to the original mesh data. In the outliner panel, I'll open up the list of objects for the linked data scene. Note that the hat.002 object is linked to a mesh object named circle. If we look at the hat object located in the original snow scene, we see that the object is linked to the very same mesh object named circle. If we look at the hat object located in the full copy scene, we see that the object is linked to a different mesh object named circle.001. Since the snow scene linked data scene objects refer to the same meshes as the original snow scene, it means that any sub-object editing done in the linked data scene will appear in the original scene. For instance, in the linked data scene, I'll select the hat.002 object. I'll tab into Edit Mode and go to Wireframe View. Here I will box select the top vertices of the hat.002 object, and I'll move them up along the Z-axis. And then I'll scale them down a bit. I'll then tab out of Edit Mode. If I go to the original snow scene, the sub-object edits made in the linked data scene are reflected in the original scene. I'll go back to the linked data scene. Although the hat object in the linked data scene and the hat object in the original scene both point to the same underlying mesh, they are still two distinct objects with different names, hat and hat.002. I'll move the location of the hat.002 object in the linked data scene. I'll then rotate it and then scale it. I'll then go back to the original snow scene. Note that the object level transformations in the linked data scene, move, rotate, and scale, have no effect on the object in the original scene, even though they share the same mesh. In a linked data scene, only sub-object edits are reflected between the scenes. Sub-object edits made in the original scene are reflected in the linked data scene, and sub-object edits made in the linked data scene are reflected in the original scene. Object-level edits, however, are not. For instance, in the linked data scene, I'll add a cube object. When I go to the original scene, the cube object is not present. Linked data scenes are useful for trying out or creating different arrangements of scene objects, perhaps for a different image rendering or perhaps for a different animation, as object transformations are not reflected in the original scene. I'll go to the original snow scene and click on the plus sign again and select Linked Objects. I'll name this scene Snow Scene Linked Objects. If we go to the Outliner panel, we see that the objects in the linked object scene are the same objects that appear in the original scene. Now these are not copies. They are literally the same objects that appear in the original scene. If we look at the hat object in the linked object scene, we see that it is the same object with the same name, and it's linked to the same underlying mesh named circle. Therefore, any object or sub-object edits made in the linked object scene are reflected in the original scene, and vice versa. In the linked object scene, I'll select the snowman's nose object and tab into Edit Mode. I'll select the tip of the nose, grab it, and pull it out a bit. I'll then tab out of Edit Mode. When I go to the original scene, the sub-object edit made in the linked object scene is reflected. In the original scene, I'll select the snowman base object and then scale it up a bit. When I go to the linked object scene, the object level scaling is again reflected. In the linked object scene, I'll add a monkey object. and I'll scale it up a bit. However, now when I go to the original scene, the monkey object does not exist. In the original scene, I'll add a torus object. In the linked object scene, the torus does not exist. In a linked object scene, all existing objects and their underlying meshes are shared. Moving, rotating, scaling, or performing any sub-object or object-level operation or edit in one scene will be reflected in the other scene. However, new objects added to either scene are independent and are not reflected in the other scene.